Dallas. The day was November 22nd, the time shortly before noon. It had rained earlier, but when John Kennedy arrived in Dallas, the sun was shining. As a result, the Secret Service left off the clear, bulletproof bubble top from the limousine. At first, the crowds were thick, but as the motorcade approached Dealey Plaza, people lining the route thinned to a trickle. And it was here that the motorcade violated the Secret Service's own rules. As the car turned, it slowed from 40 miles an hour to 7. It was precisely then that gunshots blasted out. For 6 seconds, the occupants of Kennedy's car were struck by bullets. Kennedy grasped for his throat. Connolly reacted as if he had been hit from behind. Kennedy's head exploded, driven with great force backwards and to the left. Then and only then did the president's car accelerate and speed off. Lyndon Johnson, the new president, ordered a federal commission to investigate the crime. Headed by Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren, it became known as the Warren Commission. Hundreds of witnesses, thousands of hours of testimony, and when they were done, the Warren Commission announced that 3 shots had been fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, from above and behind the president, by a single crazed gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. The Warren Commission had given us the official version. Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone. But if all 3 shots had come from behind, then why did the president's head fly backwards? A reaction more typical of being shot from the front. And why did so many people, including policemen, run not towards the book depository where Oswald was, but towards the picket fence? If the Warren Commission was right, why did so many witnesses claim to see something completely different from the official report?
I believe with all of my heart that the shots came from behind the picket fence.
And I focused in on a gentleman with a suit and a hat standing here at the picket fence. I saw a puff of smoke, then I saw a man with a rifle. I was shocked. It was a brown rifle.
And I know enough about guns and hunting to know that he was shot from the front.
I saw the man in the suit and the hat pitch the gun to the railroad man, and he walked off in this direction.
A lot of people who questioned the official report died suspiciously. You'll learn more about this later. But now, we thought we'd tell you about the man the Warren Commission said was the lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. Dallas police suspected Oswald of 2 crimes. One was killing the president. The other was the murder of a Dallas policeman named J.D. Tippit 45 minutes after Kennedy. It was a media frenzy. Within hours, we were told Oswald was a Marxist who handed out pro-Castro leaflets in New Orleans, that he was a communist who had defected to Russia, that he had renounced America and everything American, that he had married a Russian woman, and that he was a loner with a fascination for guns. This view of him was essential for the Warren Commission to explain his motives for assassinating the president.
Dispatches you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges.
Yet we didn't believe him. Why? Because everything we were told about Oswald fit our profile of a murderer. What if Lee Harvey Oswald was really a U.S. intelligence agent? Joining us now is Victor Marchetti, former executive assistant to the deputy director of the CIA under Richard Helms. Mr. Marchetti was at the CIA when Kennedy was assassinated. Mr. Marchetti, we know that Oswald lived in Russia. Was he a defector?
It's possible, but more likely he was a, what we call a dangle. He was an American intelligence agent who was put out there for the Soviets to recruit in the hope that he could penetrate their intelligence service.
Did Oswald ever work for the CIA?
Not to my knowledge, and although the CIA might have been aware of his operations, the FBI would have been aware of the operations also, particularly when he came back to this country.
Well, did Oswald work for the FBI?
No, I don't believe he did. I think he was working with naval intelligence, but the FBI was coordinating on the operation, as was the CIA in the Soviet Union, of course, when he was there earlier.
Please explain what the Office of Naval Intelligence is.
Well, the Office of Naval Intelligence is the Navy's CIA, and that is probably the outfit that Oswald was working for.
To prove that Oswald was a lone gunman, they had to fit him into an extremely tight schedule. So we went back to Dallas to trace the fateful 3/4 of an hour from Kennedy's assassination to the murder of Officer Tippit. We began in the Texas School Book Depository. On the left, you see the time Oswald had to meet. On the right, you see a clock, synchronized to the speed of the film. This is the time it actually took us. Ready. At 12:33, the Warren Commission said Oswald left the depository and walked 7 blocks to catch a bus. They gave him 3 minutes. Three minutes, but it took us 6.5. Meanwhile, after traveling a couple of blocks, the bus was caught in an immense traffic jam. They said he got off the bus. At 12:48, they said Oswald climbed into a taxi. They gave him 6 minutes to reach his next stop. It took us over 8 without traffic. The commission said Oswald entered his boarding house at 1 o'clock. At 1:03, his landlady said he left the house and went to the northbound bus stop. Yet in order to kill Officer Tippit, he had to travel south. So the commission said he must have changed his mind. Witnesses all said that Tippit was killed no later than 1:10, and that was after the policeman and his killer had a conversation. 7 minutes. Oswald simply didn't have enough time. In every case, the commission failed the time test, and we had no congested traffic to deal with. But Oswald never got his chance to tell his side of the story. Instead, in the most secure area of police headquarters, he was gunned down by a man named Jack Ruby. The murderer of President Kennedy was dead. And we were told the case was closed. But if the Warren Commission was wrong about the time schedule, perhaps they were also wrong in telling us he was a pro-communist in New Orleans.
He comes to New Orleans. He comes in and joins a group which he's supposed to be a left-wing Marxist. He isn't. He's a right-wing fascist. This is the real Oswald.
All we gotta do is get Kennedy in the open. 3 teams. We'll get him in a triangulation crossfire.
Blow away the president.
We'll use a diversionary shot. Someone we can sacrifice. Then we'll get him for real with the other 2 shots.
David.
We know people who can do it. You know we do. We'll kill Kennedy, and nobody will know who did it.
Oswald's past was hidden all these years as part of a cover-up. The truth, had it been known, had it come out, would have revealed there was a conspiracy. The conspiracy to kill the president needed a scapegoat, a patsy, someone who would take the blame. That's because there was a need for us to be directed away from the evidence, away from the fact that Kennedy was hit by 3 gunmen, firing from different positions. In a conspiracy that would embroil the nation in a cover-up so great that 12 years later, it would lead to the Watergate break-in. To understand the conspiracy that killed Kennedy and the cover-up that followed it, you must first take a step back into history to a man named Fidel Castro. In 1959, the Eisenhower administration got the shock of its life. Fidel Castro, a young freedom fighter that Washington had armed and supported, announced to the world that he was a communist. Eisenhower ordered the CIA to recruit Cuban refugees. Special military camps were set up around the country to equip and train this new force. It became known as Operation 40. But Castro continued to thumb his nose at Washington. So in June of 1960, as Castro invited Soviet advisors onto his soil, a new decision was made: assassinate Castro. Joining us now to explain more of this history is the Chief Counsel for the Christic Institute, Daniel Sheehan. The Christic Institute is a non-profit public interest law firm best known for winning the Karen Silkwood case. Mr. Sheehan, what group made the decision to assassinate Castro?
Well, we know, James, that Richard Bissell was involved, who was the deputy director for plans and covert operations for the CIA. And we know that J.C. King, who was the director of Western Hemisphere operations for the agency, was involved. And also Sheffield Edwards, the chief of security. But clearly someone from the 5412 committee, the ultra-secret committee to direct covert operations, had to have been involved in this decision at that high a level to carry out something so important.
We understand that billionaire Howard Hughes helped to set up the ultra-black operation. What role did he play?
Well, obviously, whoever this was on the 5412 committee that made this decision to kill Castro had apparently contacted Howard Hughes to get him to help set up this operation for deniability. And that is the point through which a man by the name of Robert Mayhew got assigned through the Hughes organization to carry this operation out to set up a political assassination unit, an ultra-secret political assassination unit of some dozen Cubans to kill Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Well, what happened, James, was that the decision that Robert Mayhew was involved with was directed by the 5412 committee to bring in the mob. He contacted Johnny Roselli out of Las Vegas, and then Sam Giancana, and Sam Giancana contacted Santo Trafficante. These guys all got involved in the way they had it handled. The way they had it handled was the CIA assigned specific people to supervise this assassination team. E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, very specifically, were assigned to control the training and assignment of this extremely secret political assassination team that was set up in 1960.
Mr. Marchetti, had the CIA worked with the Mafia before?
Oh, certainly. The CIA got involved with the Mafia in World War II when it was OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, in order to have the help of organized crime in their guerrilla activities in Sicily and Italy. And since then, the CIA has worked with organized crime in the Corsican Brotherhood in France, in running dope from the Middle East. They got involved with it in Southeast Asia, and eventually they got involved with crime in Latin America as well. And this brings them into Castro, because they were working with organized crime, Meyer Lansky, and that part of the Mafia in Cuba.
I see. Let's tell you more about the assassination team. Its name would change with every operation. For this program, we'll call it S-Force. With the help of organized crime figures and under the direction of the CIA, 15 professional assassins were recruited to form a special operations unit, an ultra-black assassination squad. Their job was political assassination. Their target was Fidel Castro. It was a murder incorporated, and it was a secret no one wanted to reveal. In November 1960, Nixon lost the election.
Senator Kennedy will be the next president of the United States.
And John Kennedy was sworn in as president.
So help me God.
Kennedy was not told about the existence of S-Force. This secret was kept from him by Allen Dulles, director of the CIA. However, Kennedy was briefed on the other aspects of Operation 40.
We must never be lulled into believing that either power has yielded its ambition for world domination.
In April 1961, he ordered thousands of Cuban refugees, trained and equipped by the CIA, to invade Cuba. This operation became known as the Bay of Pigs.
It was really a good plan, because early in the planning they brought in Marines who were specifically trained for over-the-beach operations.
But it turned into a disaster when somebody in the chain of command double-crossed Kennedy and canceled the final bombing run. Kennedy did not order the planes to stand down, but he was blamed. John Kennedy was suddenly hated by the Cuban exiles and all those who supported them.
We'll kill Kennedy, and nobody will know what did it.
Because Cuba was protected by the Soviet Union, Kennedy had to placate Khrushchev. He promised he would cease all CIA-related operations. But he also tried to placate the Cuban exiles. So he changed his mind and continued operations against Cuba. Kennedy's actions led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev found out that Kennedy lied to him and had continued CIA operations against Cuba. What Kennedy did was simply rename Operation 40 Operation Mongoose. Mr. Sheehan, what did Khrushchev do when he found out that Kennedy lied to him?
Well, what he did was to agree to send missiles to Cuba and to send some bombers into Cuba to start to fortify Cuba against what he expected was a future threatened invasion, again, of Cuba by Kennedy's Cuban forces.
And how close did we come to a nuclear war?
Well, it was pretty extraordinary. What happened, obviously, is the United States picked up the transport of these missiles on ships coming to Cuba and confronted Khrushchev. Kennedy confronted Khrushchev and told him that they were drawing a line in the ocean along a particular longitude, and if any of these missiles, new missiles, crossed this line, we would technically be in a state of war with the Soviet Union. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff had voted that if the ships did cross that line, that we should go to nuclear first strike to maintain our credibility.
And they crossed and?
Well, the fact is they did cross, and the Joint Chiefs reconvened and voted to go to nuclear first strike and told Kennedy that he should strike right now.
How did Kennedy react to the threat of nuclear war?
Well, according to the people that were there with him, is that he was stunned at that moment. He had come to that critical moment of history that everyone had feared, and he was being told by his Joint Chiefs that he should strike out completely against the Soviet Union. He was in his rocking chair, and apparently a tear came to his eye, and he said, I simply will not be the one that does this. And he immediately ordered all U.S. nuclear forces to stand down. This moment was what we call in kind of religious circles a metanoia, almost an experience that transported Kennedy to a different level of insight into the problems that had been being created by this Cuban plan.
Did Khrushchev really want a nuclear war?
No, it appears, James, the travesty would have been is that he had ordered the ships to stop, but they had not gotten the communication, or they had just gone across the line completely by mistake. So it would have been a horrible tragedy to have this thing happen that way.
Kennedy had come face to face with nuclear annihilation. He didn't want that to happen again. So he assured Khrushchev and Castro that the U.S. would keep its hands off Cuba. He ordered the CIA to stop interfering with Cuba. When they refused, he sent in the FBI to shut down their training camps.
They started dumping on Kennedy for attacking these bases and shutting them down and calling him a traitor.
Kennedy continued to make enemies as he pulled back from world confrontation. He put in the hotline to Moscow. He signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. That shook up the military-industrial complex. He ordered U.S. troops out of Vietnam, and that shook them up even more.
The idea was 1,000 guys out early, and then eventually everyone out by 1965. And he disagreed with his advisors. It was their opinion that we had to send combat troops, and if we didn't send combat troops, that Laos would fall and South Vietnam would fall. They even questioned the viability of India, Australia, and Japan. The whole structure of East Asia, they said, would be threatened if we allowed this to happen. So they were very serious about this.
But Kennedy was insistent. He wanted us out of Vietnam. He also decided he could no longer trust the CIA.
After the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy had decided to change the whole structure of how this government would carry out covert operations. And so he was transferring covert operations directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Shortly after that, he fired Allen Dulles, who had been the Director of Central Intelligence since 1953. That was a signal to the CIA of what Kennedy was going to do, or what he had done.
Kennedy was changing the status quo. The whispers started. From big business to the military. from disgruntled intelligence agents to anti-Castro Cubans and their right-wing supporters.
Kill Castro!
Kennedy had to go.
We'll get Castro. We'll kill Kennedy, that's who will kill Kennedy!
The mechanism was already in place. S-Force was available for hire, waiting for its next political target.
And they resolved at that point, then between May and June of 1963, that they were going to kill President Kennedy. And they were going to kill him either in Miami, because he was scheduled to come to Miami and have an open car parade there, or in Texas. And that was the decision that they made, to go forward and to kill him.
In this segment, you'll see the evidence that Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy using more than one gunman. Our first guest is Dr. Cyril Wecht, a world-renowned forensic pathologist. He has been the coroner for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and past president for the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. He was the first non-government pathologist to examine the medical evidence concerning President Kennedy's assassination. Dr. Wecht, how does the evidence prove that there was more than one gunman?
First, Mr. Jones, we have to understand the predicament that the government found itself in. When they analyzed the alleged murder weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano, non-automatic bolt-action weapon developed before World War II in Italy, they determined that it took 2.3 seconds from shot to shot, without allowing time for repositioning, re-aiming at a moving target. Then when they examined the Zapruder film, frame by frame, they saw that John Connally was completely non-reactive, 1.5 to 1.6 seconds after Kennedy had already been hit in the throat. And that is what gave birth to the single bullet theory, that one shot came through Kennedy's back, through his neck, then through Connally's chest, through Connally's wrist, and to Connally's left thigh. And that is what permitted them to say that Oswald was a sole assassin.
Why couldn't one bullet have hit Connally and Kennedy?
The bullet that was found on the stretcher at the hospital, the hero of the single bullet scenario, in its original weight was 161 grains. The bullet that was found weighed 158.6 grains, a loss of 1.5% of the original weight of the bullet. And yet, when you look at the x-rays of these two men, you see fragments of the bullet in 4 anatomic locations, with a significant fragment having been removed from the governor's wrist and another piece to this day remaining in his left leg. If you put all these together, you clearly have in excess of 1.5% of the original weight. If you look at the bullet, Mr. Jones, you'll see this is Commission Exhibit 399, the stretcher bullet, the magic bullet as the critics prefer to call it. This bullet is absolutely pristine. It's a 6.5 millimeter, fully copper jacketed, except at the base, lead core piece of military ammunition. The nose, the cone of the bullet, which allegedly destroyed 4 inches of the governor's right fifth rib and caused a comminuted or shattered fracture of the distal radius, a dense, heavy bone in a man Connally, a little taller than you even, that this bullet, according to them, broke both those bones and yet emerged in this pristine condition, losing only 1.5% of its original weight. And that is why that one bullet could not have produced those wounds.
We performed a test to find out if it was possible to have a bullet come out as the Warren Commission said it did. Larry Howard, the director of the JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas, an antique gun collector and expert marksman, performed this test.
This is a 6.5 Italian Mannlicher Carcano rifle. This rifle dates back to World War II. It's identical to the one found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository and that was allegedly used by Lee Harvey Oswald. The ammunition I'm going to fire is the same lot number allegedly used by Oswald. I got the ammunition from an antique gun collector and checked it with the information in the Warren Commission volume. The rifle is not a very reliable gun. Many times it will misfire. Now, if that happens, we're going to have to take a second shot. The target is a combination of ballistic gel and bone. The ballistic gel assimilates the same properties of skin, and Dr. Wack suggested we use cow bones because they are very close to the consistency of human bones. Here we go. can see, the bullet I just fired is severely distorted. Now let's compare it to CE-399, which is in near pristine condition.
Let's talk with Dr. Charles Crenshaw, one of the doctors in the operating room when Kennedy was brought into Parkland Memorial Hospital. Dr. Crenshaw has written the book, JFK Conspiracy of Silence, in which he reveals many secrets he kept for over 28 years. Dr. Crenshaw, the Warren Commission told us that Kennedy was shot with 3 bullets, all from the back. Did you see evidence of anything different?
Yes, I saw definite evidence. I saw evidence of 2 wounds that came from the front. The head wound was tangential in nature, but it was a large avulsed area in the right rear part of the head. There was loss of part of the parietal, temporal, and most of the occipital lobe of the right cerebral hemisphere, with exposure of the cerebellum. It was about 2.5 to 2 3/4 inches in diameter, more or less circular in place, and had the appearance of an exit wound. When I saw the autopsy photos, there was no damage or no wound in the right rear area shown in 2 photographs.
Doctor, why have you kept this information secret for so long?
Well, there was an edict of silence put out, but in deference to that physician, I believe it really meant that we in the room were not to use this intense personal experience for commercial gain or a head start in opening a new practice. However, that paternal doctrine was kept for many years. I am now 59 years old and have completed the development of my department using Parkland as a model, and will continue only in a teaching and administrative capacity for the next few years. And lastly, I think I was naive. I always felt our country would provide the best possible post-mortem examination with the best physicians, and thereby would have the best investigation for our fallen president.
Thank you, Doctor. Would you please stay on the line with us? Now we turn to our new medical evidence. Dr. Wecht, how did this new evidence come to your attention?
Larry Howard, whom we saw a little bit ago, called me and told me that he had been looking at the photos of the president's head again, and something that had troubled him perhaps subliminally previously had come to the fore once again. And that was, Mr. Jones, a straight line with short hairs in the president's scalp. We're looking at the back of the president's head, and this is the nose up front. In other words, the president is lying supine on his back on the autopsy table. What Larry noted is this straight line with short hairs. Short hairs, not the kind found in someone with a full head of hair, but the kind found at the base of the scalp, at the hairline, where one gets a haircut and where the hairs are trimmed. In other words, what we're looking at here is a portion of the scalp that has been reflected upward from the rear or occipital area that Dr. Crenshaw was referring to, that has been now reflected back up thusly, giving us the picture of the straight line with short hairs that we see here.
What does it prove?
What it proves is that this picture is very likely a revised, altered photo. It definitely proves, in conjunction with the Zapruder film that shows the president being hurled violently backward and to the left at the moment of impact of the headshot, and force equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So we know the mass of the bullet, 161 grains, traveling almost 2,100 feet per second. A tremendous impact, and supposedly, according to the Warren Commission, he's being struck from the rear, but his body moves backward and to the left. When you take that and you correlate it with the description that Dr. Crenshaw and other doctors at Parkland Hospital, and a nurse and a Secret Service agent and a funeral director all said about a gaping defect in the right rear of the skull, when you look at these photos
and you look at work that other people have been doing, including a colleague of mine, Mr. Tom Wilson in Pittsburgh and so on, you come to the conclusion that we're dealing with a big defect in the right rear of the skull, and the significance of that is that it was an exit wound, not an entrance wound. But there are other holes, too, in the head that I hope we'll have a chance maybe to talk about later.
Thank you, Doctor. Evidence like this usually never gets to the public. People who find it are often warned to keep quiet or worse are killed, like the case of Dallas policeman Buddy Walters.
He was called in to pick up an escaped convict at a motel. The court never even determined whether the gun that shot him was the policeman's gun or the escaped convict's gun.
You've seen the medical evidence that proves the fatal shot exited from the back. Before this program is over, you'll see other evidence and know how this conspiracy was carried out. But first, getting at the truth in this case has been a painstaking and dangerous occupation. As many as 177 people died simply for knowing too much. The moment Kennedy was killed, a massive cover-up went into operation. Witnesses were threatened and many were killed. Evidence was tampered with and destroyed, and documents were locked away under the guise of national security. There were many things you weren't supposed to see, like the paraffin test given to Oswald. It proved conclusively that Oswald had not fired a rifle that day, or the spy camera found in Oswald's possessions, issued to him by the U.S. government, or Oswald's letter to a Mr. Hunt, requesting his next assignment. The only Hunt we know of in this case is Howard Hunt of the CIA, who shared the same office with Oswald in New Orleans. There were intelligence connections to Oswald everywhere you looked, and every one of them was covered up. There was even advance warning of the assassination received by the FBI that was locked away, so you would never know. Roadblocks, cover-up, hiding the truth. Jim Garrison, district attorney in New Orleans, learned that the hard way.
I think he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Oswald, who was supposed to be a lone nut communist, had a very strange set of friends in New Orleans, among them David Ferry, Guy Bannister, and Clay Shaw.
Garrison learned about Oswald's connections to New Orleans. He learned about the party in the summer of 1963.
We'll kill Kennedy.
He got Ferry to talk, and Ferry started telling him amazing details of the assassination.
What we gotta do?
The word of Ferry's cooperation leaked out.
I got a phone call here in my home from Dave Ferry. He was panicking and he was almost crying. That's when the investigation leaked out. It was in a news meeting about the major investigation of the JFK. And he was, like I say, panicking. They're screaming at they're going to kill me. You know, why did you do this? You know, what happened?
Ferry was Garrison's major link to the truth. Through him, Garrison would have proved Kennedy was killed in the conspiracy. It is said Ferry wrote 2 suicide notes, both typed and neither signed. It is said he died of a massive brain hemorrhage, but many people now believe Ferry was murdered. Without Ferry, Garrison was forced to find other witnesses. He learned of a Dallas policeman named Buddy Walters. Walters had been in Dealey Plaza when he found what appeared to be a 4th bullet.
Walters originally described it as a .45 slug and then later changed and said that he hadn't found a bullet there, but there's photographic evidence from one of the Dallas newspaper photographers.
Walters agreed to come to New Orleans and testify for Garrison.
That's right. Police! I hear they got
But before he could leave, he was sent to a motel in Dallas.
Come on, we come in.
I'll tell our friend in there that he's got company. Hey, pal. Hey, pal.
So before he got to New Orleans, Buddy was killed. Garrison found another Dallas policeman, Officer Roger Craig.
Craig and another policemen found the rifle. Craig and others were the first to see the spent shells near the window, lined up in a direct row about 2 inches apart, not the way shells fall when they're ejected randomly from a gun, but placed there.
Craig also saw a man who he later said looked like Oswald running from the school book depository. When he reported this, he was told to say it didn't happen.
Hold your horses.
But Craig persisted. He too agreed to help Garrison. Craig survived, but someone was certainly trying to keep him silent. 3 more violent attempts were made on Craig's life. He kept surviving. Finally, we are told, he committed suicide. Yet Garrison was determined to find the truth. He found a new witness, Harry Russo.
Right away, I penned a letter to the DA's office in New Orleans.
Because of Russo, Garrison brought charges against the only other person at the party, a wealthy industrialist named Clay Shaw. He felt he could prove Shaw was tied to the Kennedy assassination, but he needed federal cooperation.
We got no cooperation from the federal government at all. At all. None. Zero.
It was even an attempt to threaten his key witness.
He said, you never knew anyone named Lee Oswald or Leon Oswald. You never heard anybody discuss shooting the President of the United States before the President was shot. And he says, and you did not attend any party or meeting or gathering on Louisiana Avenue Parkway that the discussion centered around shooting President Kennedy.
We know people who can do it. You know,
you never heard anybody...
When he didn't go along, Russo was taken down. Garrison was taken down as well. As soon as Shaw was acquitted, powerful forces conspired to destroy Garrison's credibility. These forces are still at work, so believes Oliver Stone.
They went after the movie with I think, deliberately, early. I've never seen a movie that was attacked before it was released. This was a vicious attack, and it came in the form of Washington Post, a big article discrediting the movie based on a stolen script. That was sent to every news organization in America. I think we were everywhere.
It was a conspiracy to kill JFK. The U.S. Congress knew that in 1978, when the acoustical evidence proved it to them. But several people knew or suspected it years earlier. Lyndon Johnson and Earl Warren realized there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy.
I'm positive that Lyndon Johnson, during that week after Kennedy's death, realized how close those bullets came to him and what they meant.
Johnson was only 2 cars behind Kennedy, and Colonel Prouty believes that fear is one of the reasons that Johnson and Warren, even J. Edgar Hoover, went along with the cover-up.
I think all those men recognized right then that the power of the bullets was very strong.
The truth frightened them too much to let it be revealed.
Nixon was in Dallas at the moment the president was killed.
He was there on business, nothing to do with the assassination. But years earlier, he had been vice president when S-Force was created. He may very well have realized that the group had been involved in the Kennedy assassination. In 1968, Nixon became president. In 1972, one of the most baffling mysteries in America began. Watergate. It was a midnight break-in to an office building in Washington.
People still don't understand what the connection between that Watergate burglary was and the assassination of President Kennedy.
5 men broke into Democratic National Headquarters. Why? Possibly because the new chairman, Larry O'Brien, might have gotten hold of documents pertaining to S-Force. These were no second-rate burglars. Most of them had been involved in the early days of S-Force. E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, Bernard Barker, Virgilio Gonzalez, and Eugenio Rolando Martinez. These were high-level intelligence agents who went into Watergate. They needed to get into Larry O'Brien's safe. They knew what to look for. The security officer called the police. But the lookout for the burglars didn't realize that the three hippies he saw were actually undercover cops.
We're going up.
But before they were successful, they were caught. And their capture led to the first resignation of an American president. Mr. Sheehan, who were the actual burglars?
The actual burglars, Rolando Martinez and Virgilio Gonzalez and Bernard Barker and the others, many of them were actual members of the ultra-secret S-Force, the political assassination group that had been set up back in 1960 when Richard Nixon had been vice president, and when Mr. Bissell and the others in the CIA had set up this ultra-secret group to assassinate Fidel Castro with the help of Howard Hughes and his lawyer, Robert Mayhew.
Was Nixon one of the conspirators to kill Kennedy?
No, it doesn't appear that that's true. It appears that what he did is he suspected that this group, that was this special group designed to assassinate heads of state, may well have done this. And since he had been vice president, when the group had been set up and the head of the 5412 committee, that it could lead back to him and generate a very bad image.
Mr. Marchetti, what can we learn from the Watergate experience?
Well, we can learn that you have to have much more tighter control over secret operations. The CIA cannot be the secret tool of the President of the United States. There has to be oversight, and not just from Congress, but from the American public.
Mr. Sheehan, everybody wants to know, who's Deep Throat?
Well, many people in a number of books, the Secret Coup and others, have suggested that it was General Haig, Alexander Haig, but it was only in part Haig. He supplied a few documents, as did Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. But the key, the guy to Deep Throat, was Robert Bennett, who was Robert Mayhew's assistant. Remember, Mayhew was the man with Howard Hughes who had set up the political assassination group back in 1960, working with the CIA in organized crime. That Robert Bennett is the man who delivered the documents to Bob Woodward.
Well, Daniel Sheehan isn't the only person who's told us that Nixon's downfall was orchestrated. At first, the Watergate break-in posed no threat to Nixon. But that all changed.
Nixon was building his own private intelligence agency, and I think this is why the other agencies, CIA and the FBI and maybe even the Pentagon, collaborated to bring Nixon down.
Nixon threatened the CIA. Nixon fired the CIA director. Nixon threatened the status quo. Nixon had to go. Exactly 9 years earlier, Kennedy had followed the same course. Kennedy had threatened the CIA. Kennedy had fired the CIA director. Kennedy had threatened the status quo. Except then, they used the assassination squad. There's little doubt that John Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy. But two questions remain. The first is, what really happened that day in Dallas?
We'll get Castro. We'll kill Kennedy, that's who. We'll kill Kennedy! Yeah, sure we will. We'll kill Kennedy and blame it on Castro. The whole country will want to invade Cuba.
David.
All we gotta do is get Kennedy in the open. And 3 teams will get him in a triangulation, a crossfire.
David.
We know people who can do it. You know we do.
Because of his ties to the CIA and the Mafia, Barry probably did know of the conspiracy that was taking shape, although it is doubtful that he knew precisely about S-Force.
The ZR rifle program was an assassination program. The ZR rifle program had been involved in assassinating Patrice Lumumba, that assassinated Trujillo.
That's the machinery, Murder Incorporated. That's the people. In fact, they call them mechanics. You see a man on the phone that simply says where, and they say in the south, and when, in the fall, and all right, thank you.
And on November 22nd, it was to be for them just another assignment. It had rained earlier that day, but by noon, it had stopped.
You're dealing with people who are trained to do this in the first place. They don't need bonuses and pay. They have access. They are assured they can leave. With the proper equipment and with access to the place and with the parade route set up to come right by where they are at a very slow pace, it's a cinch to kill the president, and they did.
Kennedy's motorcade was arranged to make 2 turns, taking him directly into a triangulation. The first shot came from the picket fence. It hit Kennedy in the throat. The second shot came from the Dow Tex building next to the book depository. It entered Kennedy's back. The third shot came from the southwest corner of the book depository, 7th floor. It hit Conlon. The fourth shot came from the Dow Tex. It narrowly missed, hit the curb, wounding a bystander. The fifth and sixth shots were fired almost simultaneously, from the depository and from the picket fence. Both hit Kennedy in the head, one from above, moving him forward, then an instant later, one from the front, tossing him back. One from above, moving him forward, then an instant later, one from the front, tossing him back. Now, only one question remains. Who ordered it? Our experts believe those orders came not from Lyndon Johnson, not from J. Edgar Hoover, not from the CIA as an agency, or even the Pentagon, but from a group of individuals, a power elite. These people knew how to turn on S-force.